Hello, DIF. I think we're online. So I'm Sega Robinson. I should add a quick caveat today. I've had a rather bad sore throat, so I hope you can hear me. My voice is a little gone. And then the second caveat is I'm actually traveling today, so I've had to pre-record this message, which is a shame, but would love any feedback or questions about this session. And I'll provide the contact details at the end. We'll just jump straight into the contents. So, excuse me. So what will we cover today? The concept, what is the social circular economy and what is it composed of? Showcase the organizations that are pursuing the social circular economy. Themes, the key traits identified across these organizations, and just the so what. What does it mean to government, corporates, and social circular enterprises? So, spoiler alert, social circular economy is effectively combining social enterprise approaches with circular economy strategies. My background is rather rooted in this mix. So, after some years of strategy consulting in London, New York, and the Middle East, I then became an on purpose fellow, which is a year-long social enterprise leadership program, often dubbed the MBA of social enterprise. After some time advising socially impactful organizations, I went to lead up the circular economy division of Oakdean Hollins, a research and consulting house, and also was the head of the Center for Remanufacturing and Reuse, where I had the privilege of advocating for remanufacturing, reuse, and circular economy more widely at speaking engagements around the world, including European Environment Agency. I also sat on the British Standard Committee that developed BS 8001, the first ever circular economy standard focused on implementing CE within organizations. I also sit on the board of stewards for OSCE Days, that is Open Source Circular Economy Days, a global network of circular economy experts, innovators, and experts who are all keen to allow access to CE knowledge, knowledge capital, I guess, for everyone. Where I formally connected the two concepts was through my Churchill Fellowship, which was kindly supported by the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust and Frank Jackson Foundation. So I was lucky enough to travel around the world meeting organizations combining these concepts. So this session is the briefest of all glimpses at that study. A more in-depth report will be available on www.socialcirculareconomy.com shortly. So while the vast majority of viewers are likely to be well versed in circular economy, I thought it would be good to just cover off the concept very briefly. Effectively, the circular economy is really an alternative to the traditional linear economy of make, use, and throwing away. We can use this now famous butterfly diagram by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to relate the three core principles. So number one, putting in sustainable and renewable inputs into the economic system. Number two, keeping resources looping around within the economy at their highest value for as long as possible, using tight loops wherever possible. So that's reduce over reuse, over refurbishment, over recycle. And finally, number three, which is really about minimizing waste or leakage into the environment and from the economic system. So in essence, the circular economy is an operating model to ensure that the economy doesn't harm the planet and in fact benefits the environment, the more of it that takes place, at least in theory. So a word on social enterprise. It's effectively a business with a clear social mission, one that generates the majority of its income from trading products or services, and then one that actually reinvests profits into scaling that impact, be it investing directly in that mission or in itself. It's often recognized that they should be autonomous and independent from the state. Slightly arbitrary point, but historically many social enterprises spun off from the public sector, so that's why that distinction is often made. Finally, they are often particularly transparent and accountable, and this is because they often work at community level with often disadvantaged people. So basically, the license to operate is really to build trust, and you do that, of course, by being transparent and accountable. So we'll just jump now to why we need a social circular economy. And I'll try to do that with these four system diagrams. They presuppose that the happy equilibrium point is to have a strong economy that's embedded within a flourishing society, and that's part of a thriving environment. Hopefully you'll agree that's a relatively uncontroversial assumption. If you focus on the leftmost diagram, you can see that the current linear economy is very much overreaching its happy equilibrium point, and is making society and environment subservient to it. And this is evidenced by deforestation, mining accidents, wiping out kind of local ecosystems, oil spills, and the like. So the one on the right is a social circular economy, which describes an optimized solution for the whole system's perspective. The second from the left is the circular economy, and this perspective combines environmental and economic considerations front of mind, but that it doesn't necessarily put onus on social elements. So to illustrate this point, let's consider the circular economy would be a proponent for a business model using a robot that could repair secondhand or perhaps remanufacture secondhand mobile phones, slightly cheaper than the current business model, where they're sent to landfill or partial recycling. We often hear these horrendous stories of waste electronics going to West Africa and being burnt and whatnot. However, it being circular economy would still be a proponent for this robot if it was 1% more economical than hiring, say, 5 refugee women doing the same repairs. So they would have livelihoods to support themselves, their families, and spend the money in the local economy. And without that kind of linkage to that local context of repair. So we can see that in this example that the circular economy has significant benefits over that current linear model, but far less than the social circular economy approach. So turning to the social enterprise model, this considers the economy and society, but doesn't necessarily care about the environment. Often does, but not always. So as an example, a social enterprise that supports those with mental health issues gain work by manufacturing soap and cleaning products would always continue to increase production if there's market demand in order to scale its social impact and make more profit. And that's exactly what it should be doing. However, the production of these products may use toxic chemicals, create harmful byproducts or waste products that are difficult to deal with. So even so, the social enterprise better meets its internal objectives about social impact and making more money by harming the planet more. So social circular economy would instead use a cradle-to-cradle concept and formulate products in the right way, and it will probably have slightly higher initial investment costs. However, what it does is it ensures a sound ecological supply chain, and the product would enrich rather than contaminate the environment at the end of use. So hopefully we can conclude that social enterprise and circular economy present really great boundary conditions to the current economic operating model, but they don't always represent a holistic view of how to deliver that value. So effectively what social circular economy allows is a slight decrease in profitability to ensure benefits for environment and society. And when you're referencing against the circular economy and social enterprises, it fills in the gap that those two doesn't. So if we talk about this kind of wider system value, the benefits of social circular economy is that they are, it's highly aligned to supporting the UN Sustainable Development Goals, something countries and companies are becoming increasingly interested in or worried about. I won't dwell on it here, but certainly collectively, the organizations that I've met could easily tick off all of these 17 goals. So speaking about the organizations I've met, I typically take them through the social circular business model canvas. This is a useful way to dig into the value creating model of an organization. I created this as the available tools that I was looking around at were quite capturing everything I needed. It draws on the business model canvas and the lean canvas, but adds its own elements such as governance. This is particularly interesting actually for social enterprises because many have rather more community-focused governance structures. And these have quite a large bearing on how an organization operates. You can imagine cooperatives are a lot more democratic and they have different procedures. This canvas will be available actually on socialcirculareconomy.com in the coming days, and if you're interested in using it. So it's probably worth just having a little bit of structure before giving a few examples of the organizations within the social circular economy. There's lots of ways to cut the social circular enterprises, as I call them, into different groups, including the Sustainable Development Goals. But today I'll use circular economy business models. I'm assuming quite a lot of people are familiar with them, so hopefully that it'll be easier to pick up. So just to quickly go through them, number one, dematerialization. So this is really about reducing the amount of resource required to create products. So this might be digitization, on-demand production, or a move to reusable products from single use. Examples might be Netflix streaming shows rather than producing and sending DVDs around the world. Number two, circular inputs, really about using renewable, sustainable, fully biodegradable, or fully recyclable inputs into the economic production system. Number three, product life extension, excuse me, extending the life of products really, and this is done by design for durability or design for modularity, maintenance and repair, one that's often forgotten, reuse, reconditioning, refurbishment, remanufacture, repurpose, and parts harvesting. So examples might be Patagonia that repairs and designs for repair of clothing, and Fairphone, which designs phones built with durability and modularity in mind. And that actually uses ethical supply chains. So Fairphone actually would count as a social circular enterprise. Number four, resource recovery. Resource recovery is effectively recycling, but it can also include biochemical extraction, anaerobic digestion, and composting. A good example might be Toast Ale, which uses surplus bread to brew beer, and actually Carpet Manufacturer Interface. They have their networks program, which collects nylon fishing nets, which are recycled into new carpet yarn with its partner Aquafil. Number five, the trickiest one to explain, product as a service or product service system. And within this, I include the sharing economy. Often that's broken out, but in my view, it's just a part of. So this really comprises leasing and performance-based payment or paying for success, sharing of resources, and peer-to-peer lending. So ones that people probably are very familiar with is Airbnb and Uber. So these are the buckets we'll use to pick examples of social circular enterprises. Obviously, I've got dozens and dozens to present, but I've only managed to pick a few from the trip that I went on. We'll be uploading more in-depth versions, including the social circular business model canvas assessments for many more organizations going forward. So worth keeping an eye out on the website in future. So the first, sorry, that's just a screenshot of the showcase. You can see some of the social circular enterprises on the side there. So jumping into the first CEBM, so the circular economy business model, we're focusing on dematerialization here, and in particular, the on-demand methodology. The organization we'll talk about is Retalia, who are based in Sao Paulo in Brazil. A really cool little organization. They specialize in the reverse logistics of used corporate uniforms, and then they refurbish and repurpose those into new products. So this is done on a contract basis to return the waste, if you like, or rather nutrient, back to the organization that produced it in the first place. So the uniforms are delivered to Retalia, who employ an ex-offender to triage the items and ensure things like company logos are destroyed and or returned back to the client. And then it uses a third party for laundry. They then work with a network of women seamstress collectives to perform refurbishing and repurposing. The collectives are typically enterprising women that have learned to sew from weekend training courses run by local NGOs. The women don't really have access to market, so that's what Retalia provides beyond some of the training and whatnot. They then work with the collectives to provide this regular income, and it was very interesting actually to see on a visit to one of these collectives, Costurando a Vida, that it really showed the kind of community nature of how they operate. On the day of the visit, a mother, two daughters, and an auntie greeted us, and they showed how the open relationship that they have with Retalia really means that potential issues are headed off early because they can be honest about production supply lines and whatnot. So the majority of the corporate uniforms are repurposed as the placement of logos and wear patterns like elbow areas mean that the full refurbishment of back to that original product format isn't often practicable. But this represents a challenge in that repurposing means producing items such as bags and smaller pieces of clothing and accessories, but it requires quite a lot of in-house design and design expertise, if you like, and so much more time-consuming and intricate. Further, it produces more offcuts, so this could become waste. Luckily, Costurando a Vida used these offcuts to teach young women in the community how to sew and propagating those skills and hopefully creating new employees. Excuse me. Another challenge to that bespoke nature is that it's hard to develop a standard approach to the work. So it's quite a lot of work goes into each contract. So a potential solution is to move toward a more homogeneous product, such as shredded textile for blankets and carpets. This would potentially help with scaling, but has the downside of producing lower value products as less of that embedded value or embedded work in the original product is recovered. Excuse me. The next CEBM is circular inputs, and specifically talking about biodegradable inputs. I'm going to give you a 2-for-1 here in Growbox and Mycotech. They're separate entities, but both run by the same people and utilize fungi to generate value from agricultural waste. So Growbox sells oyster mushrooms to consumers, and what they do is they also support disadvantaged local farmers who provide that agricultural waste and help grow the mushrooms on them. So the mushrooms come in a variety of colors, and they all have different associated health benefits. And so Growbox sells these grow boxes. So the top left picture there. These are mushrooms in stasis. They sprout as soon as the consumer sprays water on it. So it's quite a nice little, almost gimmicky product, but it's a lovely product nonetheless. And it typically produces 3 harvests. Growbox has, excuse me, Growbox has popularized this mushroom eating in Indonesia, helping to spread the message of the health benefits. A nice touch is the development of an augmented reality app, so the bottom left there, that allows consumers to view a virtual mushroom growing out of the box. That helps consumers see what the mushroom looks like. And this is a question that often cropped up from consumers. So that was their response to that. Excuse me. So turning now to Mycotech, which is on the right-hand side. They focus on mycelium, baked mycelium, in fact, rather than edible mushrooms. So it uses a proprietary method to produce this baked product, and it actually is an alternative building material, which is still biodegradable. It can be used in interior design, as wall tiles, or actually even as furniture. So both Growbox and Mycotech product took years of research and constant adaptation, if you like. So the process isn't likely to be directly transplantable to other parts of the world. This is because the agricultural waste is different in different parts of the world, and also the climate dictates the growing conditions. But of course, you can easily imagine that a similar approach could be taken with other food and agricultural wastes, in partnership with a corporate, for example, and making similar products using slightly different conditions. So moving on to one of my favorite organizations, it also allows me to kill 2 birds with 1 stone in terms of tackling 2 CBMs in one go. So we're talking about product life extension, so reuse, refurbishment, repurpose, and also resource recovery, i.e. recycling. So this organization is called Upasol, and they're, excuse me, they are based dually in Vicuña and La Serena in Chile. Vicuña is a rural town in the Andes. It doesn't receive very much support from central government from a perspective of health services. So it formed from this lack of provision because several parents wanted to start a rehabilitation center for their disabled children. It quickly became apparent that it required funding and equipment. So rather bizarrely, a recycling center was started in the seaside tourist town of La Serena, about an hour's drive down the hills, to raise funds for the actual center. So the recycling center is embedded within a community where no alternative municipal waste collection service is available. The community come and drop their non-organic waste off in a holding area, which Upasol then triages. You can see here. And it's done on a very compact facility. So the approach is that nothing is thrown away, even the tiny spoonful of washing powder that is left in the empty box is collected. And over the course of a couple of months, actually, a whole bag is filled, and that's donated to poor people within the area. Loose screws and metal brackets stored in drawers on site, so you can see that there. And excuse me, these by themselves aren't very useful, but after a while you start to get whole drawers of them, and obviously that then becomes much more useful. Once the materials have been triaged and aggregated, they are sold onto or processes. Upasol pretty adept actually at knowing the best market prices available. So they take the trouble to sell materials like aluminium in Santiago because they know they can get a much higher arbitrage opportunity, if you like, versus local prices, while other materials like cardboard fetch a similar price locally. So the recycling operation is so successful that it can employ 8 people to work there and another 6 at the rehabilitation center. So it's possible to imagine instead, rather than work at municipal collection level, a large corporate could work with the likes of Upasol as their waste management solutions provider, where they know that there's a social impact also occurring. Excuse me. The principles of circular economy are really embedded throughout Upasol, with the rehab center kitted out with donated medical equipment. Much of it was broken and so has been refurbished to be made use of again. The on-site kitchen, in fact, is all reclaimed equipment, and at the time of visit, the center was being refurbished, so second-hand carpet was being prepared to insulate walls, and lighting from a recently closed down business were being prepared again to be installed. Upasol really makes use of everything, and that includes broken hospital trolleys by repurposing them as gates, and it maintains an old ambulance from the UK, I think Liverpool, even though the driving position is actually on the wrong side for Chile. It also reuses donated crushing and baling machines from Japan for its recycling activities. Excuse me. So practically everything in the center is recovered. And when these recovered goods are not of direct relevance to the center, they are put into the on-site museum of old objects. And this is to teach people about the transience and obsolescence of consumer products and the importance of reuse and reduction. So finally, we come to product service systems. So this is where we'll discuss Coron Gallery from the beautiful island region of Coron in the Philippines. So it started as a gallery showcasing local art and photography in the area. It branched out after a number of years into tours, visiting nearby islands for snorkeling and scenery. But it quickly became apparent that between these trips, there was a lot of damage to marine areas. And after some investigation, it turned out that these were indigenous groups that, finding it difficult to get by, were plundering natural resources, including dynamite fishing, which devastated grouper and wrasse populations. So, excuse me, realizing it was a symptom of the lack of support they had, Coron Gallery decided rather than reporting them to the authorities, they would meet, talk, and get to know these indigenous groups. So it then proposed to bring them into the tour activities and provide them with income, and educated them on the importance and benefits of preserving the environment. Starting with 2 families, fishing boats were converted into tourist boats, and a new tourage package was developed to sell what they call seat in coach. So really booking a seat in a coach or a plane and sharing the tour with other punters, if you like. So this was actually unlike a lot of the private tour offerings that other operators provided. And this approach is really scaled, and it has well over 15 boats now. And each boat actually represents income for 7 families, because there's a boat owner, a captain, some crew, food preparers, which are generally women, who don't often get to participate as much in the economy, and recipients of entrance fees for access to indigenous areas and marine parks. So Coron Gallery operate the market-facing side of it, the website, the office, and it provides access to the markets and brings in those bookings. So the model is actually brought, excuse me, together as a cooperative rather than a company employee or service provider supplier approach, which really helps to empower the communities. The impact has included Indigenous children staying in school, graduating college, and getting jobs. Previously, this was pretty unlikely to happen. So beyond bringing in stakeholders in a more democratic approach, this structure has a business benefit. So it makes operations leaner and more responsive to improving the service, because customer feedback can easily be traceable to the exact person responsible, say the boat cleanliness. So Coron Gallery can relate this back very quickly and work with that person to fix the issue in future. And this is quite distinct from other operators in the area, because they typically own boats, rooms, provide food, tour guides. So the staff end up working across a variety of functions, making it really much more difficult to find out how to address those issues. So in effect, Coron Gallery utilizes the product of a beautiful destination and then sells access to it using an ecotourism service. It works with local indigenous communities and provides them with decent work, and thus preventing the destruction of coral reefs, marine ecosystems, and rainforests in the area. Excuse me. So, moving quickly on to themes. So we see organizations combining circular economy business models, suggesting there are quite a lot of synergy effects. For example, a waste collection service would typically work much better if they use product life extension for some products and resource recovery, so recycling, for other products that they recover. Broker enabler role. This is a really key piece. We tend to see that these social circular enterprises are the go-between role between corporate clients and community. They need to have the ability to firstly understand that corporate perspective, delivering consistent quality on time and minimizing hassle for the client. On the flip side, they need to understand how to train, empathize with, motivate, and support communities actually executing the circular economy activities. And so typically we find the management team are former corporate people who've broken out, if you like, to provide this social circular economy approach. The next one will be training provision. So most of these organizations were upskilling their employees and suppliers, with some even having bespoke in-house modules. Scaling impact. Organizations that were really looking to scale their impact and really understanding what they were trying to do considered three approaches. So one was building a new marketplace based on an online platform to connect demand with supply that they might not be able to see on their own. Automating manual operations. So this would remove the organization itself from potential bottleneck to scaling, because often they were the go-between between the demand and supply. And thirdly, social franchising. So this is coming up with a replicable model and allowing others to use that model, but using your own brand name. Another theme was a cross-subsidy model. So, excuse me, we see organizations generating income through value-adding circular economy approaches, and then using that money to support beneficiaries in a rather different model. So this mixed approach isn't that uncommon across the social enterprise world, but less common elsewhere. Then small capital operations. The organizations of the study relatively low capital operations and seem to scale somewhat linearly without need for jumps in capital spend. This is often due to the underlying asset being on a continuous scale, really, rather than discrete. So many of the organizations that we met focused on textiles, for example, and to double the amount of waste material, if you like, that needs to be processed, you actually don't really need much more than the original sewing kit, or sewing machine. So those are the types of considerations that you see. And then the final theme, or at least the final theme we're presenting here today, is volunteer support. Since these organizations work at community level, they focus on helping society, and that means they're able to leverage volunteer support, allowing them to actually reduce costs of delivering a product or service. That on the flip side, though, they don't always have the capacity or capability to run high quality volunteer schemes. So things like websites that might be built by volunteers don't get proper handovers, and sometimes become underutilized going forward because the volunteers have left. So just a word on reverse logistics, which is one of the key kind of things that were inbound hypothesis was around really requiring user-powered collection to ensure that costs were low. So by this I mean the previous product user would come and deliver the item, and then the social circular enterprise would add value to it. But actually the 5 return mechanisms that were identified didn't actually seem to corroborate this. So not a great hypothesis from my side, in that a lot of the collection is based on actually baking in or pricing in this added logistics cost into the product or service. So, excuse me, the first one, collection as a service. This is generally used for mixed solid waste. So all the organizations that we studied work to some degree with clients to foster an understanding of the need to separate waste streams and lower their own costs in doing so, but obviously increasing the purity and the volumes that can be recycled. So while these waste streams can vary widely in content, they're relatively continuous in supply, and that means that there's only there's only a certain number of recyclable material grades. So the system is relatively similar day to day. So these material grades will have a liquid market, which supports investment in that infrastructure to triage and process these materials. And beyond the service of collection, these triaged and processed materials are sold on that market, but without any real addition of value to these materials. Excuse me. So product price includes collection. So this really is about the collection representing a significant activity of the business, but that differs to the previous one, collection as a service, because there's no revenue generated through that collection, but only through the product sales. So think about Growbox earlier. They'll collect agricultural waste, and it's a significant activity for their business, but they don't specifically charge for that collection. So generally, that material in this mechanism it has value added to it, like the mushrooms, for example, rather than just being kind of triaged and sent to processors like the previous one. So this means that the value per mass, or the dollars per kilogram, if you like, is high enough to incorporate logistics costs as a small part of that overall cost structure for the product. Excuse me. So third one is part of a contract. Typically, this is part of a valorization service for single end-of-use waste streams produced by one client, really. So this might be corporate uniforms, for example, like Retalia, or we've seen seat belts and banners from corporates that have been upcycled. Excuse me. So these wastes are generally produced in a batch manner, once a year, for example, rather than continuously. And since the clients are often the producer of that waste in the first place, it's understood that the cost of waste disposal and reverse logistics are recouped within the overall service cost, but not specifically as a form of as a line item. So because the material is relatively homogeneous within each batch, at least, it justifies the level of design work to repurpose into higher value items like bags. This added value helps also to cover the reverse logistics costs. And where wastes are purely donated, rather than wanting to be recovered afterwards, it doesn't really represent a prohibitive cost for the donor to drop off, since it's usually just a one-off truck. And obviously it will avoid waste disposal costs. So push to supply is the fourth one. So these broker type organizations push the risk and cost of reverse logistics back to the supplier, who are typically productive groups and artisans. These groups typically live right near the origin of the inverted commas waste, but nutrient. Think textile offcut, and therefore can source it for basically no cost. So this nutrient is then used to produce goods and aggregated into a large batch, and from the collectives, those large batches are sent in bulk to the broker social enterprise. The broker then pays the supplier, and taking a cut for the access to market and the training and the support it provides. Excuse me. Push to user. So the final one, or waste producer actually might be a better term, isn't too prevalent model found in the emerging markets, but particularly in developed nations, users or consumers who have no further need for a product often drop off that item. Think, I don't know, an old laptop at a charity shop. Charity shops are social enterprise divisions of charities. So just an interesting diagram here of why some of this matters. Because social circular enterprises work at a distributed level, we can see two different types of approaches that you can come out of in terms of circular economy. So approach one, you take material resources from the earth, produce something in one central factory, forward logistics to the consumer or user, reverse logistics back to a large plant where a valorization step takes place. So you might be remanufacturing or whatnot, and then this new product has to have forward logistics to go to new customers. So it's quite the number of steps. Whereas approach two, working with social circular enterprises, you have the same steps all the way up to the consumer, but then instead of having these at least significant reverse logistics costs, because these social circular enterprises are often working at community level, they can source those end-of-life products and produce or at least valorize in situ near that location, and then also sell or servitize that product at that local level. So we don't have all this extra steps. And I'm actually working with a client right now on this type of model, and it's looking like, from an economic modeling perspective, that it does have significant benefits. What it does entail, though, is if you're a corporate and you want to work using approach two, you have to trust your social circular enterprise partners, and that's really the only way to access this new form of business model. So what? There's a bunch more recommendations in the report I previously mentioned, which is much more significant than this quick session. That'll be available soon on the website. But one of the key things to say is that this concept is happening already across the world, and what it is it's not particularly networked yet. It's underutilized, it's under-resourced. It hasn't got the right support from government to nudge supply and upskill those social circular enterprises. So really the public sector should be thinking about how to stoke this demand, because the more of this that goes on, the less costs there are in terms of servicing society, if you like. So the public sector really needs to be serious about procurement. Particularly in the UK, the Social Value Act actually stipulates that these types of considerations around social and environmental impact should be made at the point of procurement, but it's usually pretty cursory at the moment, and I'm sure it's a similar case across the world. So really pushing procurement to think about that more clearly will help social circular enterprises be put into the frame of consideration. And also the public sector need to support the professionalization and the networking of these organizations. Because let's say you have a social enterprise that sells carpet to social housing. Now, if there's many of those organizations well networked, then large carpet tile manufacturers, for example, could start to interact with them. And then from a private sector side, we're really thinking about the demand side of the equation. So there's a real opportunity for everyone to participate in this kind of shared environmental, social, and economic value here. So at the beginning, the private sector should really start by thinking about what wastes you're creating, particularly batch ones. Typically, continuous waste streams already have a solution and already have a waste management provider. But the batch ones, for example, corporate uniforms, are a great opportunity to work with these social circular enterprises and start that journey. Really, this also requires a focus on values. So if you're an educational organization, then maybe work with social enterprises that take waste to valorize, to create value, to support educational activities. So that really aligns the values and tells the right story. And there are plenty of examples out there. So the private sector shouldn't be a laggard on this. Organizations are already working with, private sector organizations are already working with the social circular economy. So reach out. We've got all kinds of bits and bobs that hopefully can help. And I guess one thing I should mention is that the website has other random initiatives, including circular wedding guide, systems mapping for different types of products. We've recently started with the electronics mapping. So how do we map social circular enterprises so consumers know where they are? And actually starting to create a large directory of these organizations so we can start to network and also provide support in terms of for corporates that might want a network of organizations, for example, furniture social enterprises. So please do send any questions or feedback to Social Circular Economy. You can find our website at www.socialcirculareconomy.com, and please do reach out with those questions or feedback at sago.robinson@socialcirculareconomy.com, or tweet out to so_circecon or Sago Robinson. Thank you very much for your time. It's been a very enjoyable session for me.